Finishers square off. Coming up this weekend, we have no hype Phil Hawes, who must have lost the Rashad Evans in his corner because the nickname came out all of a sudden, and Rashad was always singing his praises. Hawes taking on Roman Dolidze out of Georgia. A couple of guys that love to finish fights, and a couple of guys that are no slouches on the ground, especially when we're talking about Roman Dolidze, whose background, it started in Sambo, a little bit in Jiu-Jitsu, and then really his grappling is so well-rounded. That's what got him to the dance. But when you consider it for Dolidze, former FILA World Grappling Champion, ADCC Asia and Oceania Champion as well. And Dolidze, if you do watch him fight, especially when he just started off his UFC tenure, he was really hot and heavy on the ground game.
Yeah.
He was big at trying to go for leg locks, looking at Eric Nixick going, you like this, coach? And then trying to finish his fights up until he ended up fighting Trevin Giles. And if you do look at it for Dolidze, first pro fight is at heavyweight, after that at light heavyweight. And if you do look at it, like even at ADCC, he was competing at 99 kgs, so about 218 pounds. Dolidze makes that middleweight debut against Giles. Can't figure out that power jab. So he has to really try and reinvent it a little bit. His next two fights, he beats the blown-up welterweight Laureano Staropoli, and then his last time out fights Kaldakis in a fight that I didn't think Dolidze was going to win, especially by that knee that he threw. But my God, did he look good, and he got an extra $50K for that performance.
And this is a weird thing about this fight. Both fighters are 4-1 in their last five, but this does feel like an oddly important matchup to be buried so far deep on the card, because both guys have had, I would say, high ceilings placed on them by the MMA community. And not that I don't believe either guy could eventually get into the rankings, but it does feel like it's okay. One fighter's going to be able to maybe achieve that as a ceiling, but the other one's probably going to get cut to the wayside as a result. Now, maybe using the term cut is a little bit harsh by me, but
I think they say left by the wayside.
Left by the wayside, but you get the idea. The loser of this fight is going to get very much left off track, whereas the winner, I think, still has the possibility to get a number next to their name. We talked about the middleweight division, and now it is a little bit shallow compared to a lot of the other divisions in the UFC, especially the lighter ones. We talk about bantamweight, really all the way up to welterweight. That's kind of like the cream of the crop. I think there's a world where Dolidze could go out there and really use his offensive wrestling. We saw how effective he is with his offensive strikes in the clinch the last time out against Kaldakis, and I think that's where he can have success, but I think range is going to be important in this fight. I think the long-range Phil Hawes has much more technical boxing. He has a steadier jab, better straight punches as well. I think that's where Hawes can have success, but the weird thing about it is, on the inside, I favor Dolidze with the striking. I like both guys grappling, though, and I really will be interested to see whose grappling is going to win out, because we know Phil Hawes is a very good offensive wrestler, but with Roman Dolidze, it's a very unique style of grappling. He much prefers upper body throws, hip tosses, and that sort of style of grappling, so I'm very interested to see how his judo style of takedown is going to mesh against Phil Hawes' more traditional takedown.
I mean, for Phil Hawes, he was a JUCO national champion when he wrestled at Iowa Central, and then he ended up going to D1 Iowa State, and if you do look at it for Hawes, he was on the Ultimate Fighter as long ago as Tough 23. He ended up losing to the eventual champ of that season, Andrew Sanchez. He loses on World Series of Fighting to eventual millionaire Louis Taylor, who was in the corner of Bilal Muhammad just last weekend. So Louis Taylor gets the shouts, but he loses that fight, takes about a year off. They have him on Dana White's Contender Series Season 1. That was Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series. He loses by finish to Julian Marquez, takes some more time off, has some fights here and there, comes into the UFC, and it's been weird, because, I mean, you're winning fights, you're beating Jacob Malkoun very quickly, walking him down, knocking him out. He fights Nasruddin Imavov, out-wrestles him, but it was a close fight, wins by majority decision. He fights Kaldakis and wrestles him pillar to post and looked great in that one. Loses to Chris Curtis in a fight where he's having tons of success, and then Curtis just picks it up.
You got big power.
Not as great at snapping with one hand as I am the other, but when I snap with both of them, I can get it. And then his last time out, he fought Deron Winn. And Matt, my question to you, have you ever seen a guy beat the fuck out of another guy like that for 2 rounds before the referee decided no mas?
Saw Gerald Mearshare fight Deron Winn. That's the problem. Yes, you're right, it was an impressive performance, but it was against Deron Winn of all people.
So we reel it in, we take that fishing rod and throw the fly out there, and we'll say this. The things that I liked out of Phil Hawes in that matchup, he worked his jab. His best weapon in that fight was either the step in like a Paul Felder elbow, or he was mixing them in that way, and he was using it from both stances and both elbows. And I did like to see that out of Hawes. And we've seen this camp out of Killcliff FC. So many good middleweights in that gym to get ready for a fight like this. So for Phil Hawes, getting ready there for Roman Dolidze, Extreme Couture. And for Dolidze with his striking, he will throw a jab. He will mix in a little bit of an overhand to close the distance.
He's more hittable, though, when he throws his own strikes, I think.
Little bit more hittable. Obviously, the chin is questionable of Phil Hawes, and we've seen that in a lot of his fights. But for Dolidze, the best, or when he's at his best when he's striking, well, it was outside of the UFC. He was a former WWFC light heavyweight champ. When he fought Pasternak in that fight, he was just throwing spin and stuff. He was going wild with his striking. He was having tons of success. And you could say, well, Craig, it's WWFC. And I'd say, yeah. I understand that. It's not the UFC. But for Dolidze, we saw him have a lot of success there. I'm sure Extreme Couture, Eric Nixick, they're saying just clean it up 100%. A little bit. What do I know? I'm behind this computer screen. So I do look at this fight as, again, like you said, a very important fight. The big trouble I have when I'm trying to make a pick in this one, and trust me, it is difficult here. Phil Hawes, historically, in the UFC is a sample size. 5.68 significant strikes per minute to 3.43 absorbed. So both above UFC average. The absorbed just slightly above average. It's 3.38 is the average. Or sorry, 3.39. It's gone up a tick. For Roman Dolidze, throws 2.43 significant strikes per minute, absorbs 1.45. What Dolidze throws out there traditionally is less than what Hawes absorbs, and Dolidze just doesn't throw a lot when he's on the feet, and there are long periods of time where he's at distance against his opponents.
And that's why I 100% agree with the odds. I don't know if you want to bring them up before I want to go on this little spiel.
Hawes opened a plus 115 underdog, minus 170 right now. Dolidze opened a minus 135, plus 140, and I had a lot of confidence in Dolidze coming into the UFC. I thought this guy, we're not talking top 15. We're talking top 10. This guy's going on a run at 205.
Is he your Dante Exum?
It's a shallow division. But for me, I just don't know what to think anymore. He looks so good against Kyle Dawkins, and Phil Hawes looked really good against Kyle Dawkins too, just tales of opposite fights. But I do have a hard time with this.
It is another one of those things that it comes down to, what is your opinion of Kyle Dawkins? Because he was another fighter who, again, had a high ceiling, had high expectations, and they never really came to fruition over time. But I must say, I do agree with where the odds are and with who is favored. Because for Phil Hawes, I think he does excel in about 2 of the 3 ranges of MMA in this fight. I think the traditional takedowns of Phil Hawes are going to give Roman Dolidze trouble. I think Hawes has more staying power as this fight continues, and I do think that's why he's a little bit more favored in this fight. I think if he can stay connected to Roman Dolidze in the 3rd round, but use his range in the first 2, use the jab, use his longer range strikes. I know Dolidze is the bigger guy, so you would immediately assume, okay, he's going to have success at the long range, but when you really do break down their styles, I do think Hawes is a much steadier jab, and I think that jab's going to be really important. You bring up that Trevin Giles performance, I think that's a really important one to bring up. Not that Hawes is as technical as Giles, because I think Giles is a little bit faster with some of his techniques on the hands, but Hawes hits a whole hell of a lot harder, and he's especially a lot more right-hand dominant when he does land that powerful right hand. So I think there is a good pathway for Phil Hawes to win this fight, but I think there's a competitive argument to be made for either athlete to win this fight, although my pick is going to be with Phil Hawes.
Matt, giving out the pick before we look at the Tapology votes all over the place. Well, let's look at the Tapology votes. Surprised to us as they are to you. I'm going to say over under 70% Phil Hawes.
I think it'll be under.
You think it's going to be under? It is under. 636 total votes. 64% Hawes, 52% by decision, 44% by knockout. For the 36% that have Dolidze, 35% by decision, 52% by knockout. I don't know why there aren't more people that have Dolidze to win by submission. Lewis Taylor did it all those years ago. Dolidze would be a likely candidate there. And I would think if Dolidze wins, he could get it done in all 3 different ranges. Could get it done by decision, submission, or knockout. And you might say, well, Craig, you're not wrong if you pick one of those. Well, I know that. But if I am looking at this fight, Matt, I do like Hawes. I like the mix of the combinations. I don't love the chin. We've established this in many of his fights, but we have seen him wrestle continuously throughout his fights and it not totally eat away at his gas tank. Where for Dolidze, we saw him even in the John Allen fight kind of struggle with it, and I think at 185 it's a little bit more of a grind for Dolidze. Both guys heavily muscled. Phil Hawes, the other thing that I want to say, as much as he does strike, he does not throw leg kicks, at all.
Very boxing.
He has in certain fights, but Hawes isn't a guy that's big behind the leg kicks. Even though he has big thighs, it's more to get that leverage and that power into his takedowns. Dolidze, couple of guys, tree trunks for legs. But for me, I like Hawes a little bit more in this matchup. But if you made a compelling argument for Roman Dolidze, I'm here to listen to you.
And again, like I said, I think this is a very fun fight lower on the card. Again, it's a very important fight for both athletes. This is one of those like baseball games midway through the season where if you don't follow that team, like I'm a big Yankees fan, so life's been tough the past week, but it's one of those games where it's like, okay, it's a pennant race. If you're not a diehard fan of that team, you might not realize the significance that it does hold on the standings overall. But I think this fight's very similar to that. I think Hawes and Dolidze both have the potential to be one of those floaters in the top 15. A guy who could be number 14, number 15, could be in the rankings one week. You check the next week, and all of a sudden they have two guys who have won a little bit more recently in there. But you get the idea. Two very talented fighters in their own right. But I agree with you. I also have Phil Hawes.
Well, it was going with no hype. I don't like the nickname.
I don't either.
I like his, like, what is it, Friday or whatever on his Instagram, where he has, like, completely random people over there doing crazy stuff. So make sure you check out Phil Hawes' Instagram game. What a big card we have. Only 9 fights as of Sunday night. So, man, if there's any changes throughout the week, you're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. And as we always say, let's get into it.